The summer of 1856 arrived heavy and suffocating over Carter Plantation in Virginia, where cotton fields stretched endlessly beneath an unforgiving sun. Samuel had worked these fields for 32 years, his hands calloused from labor, his back bent from endless toil. Yet despite the cruelty of his bondage, he maintained something rare among the enslaved, a quiet dignity that even Thomas Carter, the plantation's master, seemed to grudgingly respect. Samuel's position was unusual. While other slaves toiled exclusively in the fields or kitchens, he had been given responsibilities within the main house itself. He managed private errands, maintained the family's intimate spaces, and bore witness to secrets that would never be spoken beyond the mansion's walls. This proximity to power was both privilege and curse, for it meant he saw everything, the facade of gentility, the rot beneath. On the night of June 15th, Samuel was summoned to the birthing room. Mrs. Elizabeth Carter had been in labor for 14 hours, attended by the plantation's elderly midwife, Mama Ruth, and 2 house servants. The master paced downstairs, drinking brandy and waiting for news of his heirs. Everyone expected twins. The doctor from Richmond had confirmed as much during his last visit. No one anticipated what actually came. The first baby emerged pink and wailing, a healthy boy with wisps of light hair. 15 minutes later, a second child arrived, another pale infant with his father's prominent chin. Mama Ruth cleaned them both, wrapped them in white linen, and smiled despite her exhaustion. 2 strong boys to carry the Carter name forward. But labor continued. Mrs. Carter's screams intensified, confusing everyone present. Mama Ruth examined her again and gasped. "There's another one," she whispered urgently. "Lord have mercy, there's 3. The third child came 20 minutes later. The moment Samuel saw the baby's skin, several shades darker than its siblings, with tight curls already visible on its small head, he understood the catastrophe unfolding. Mrs. Carter's face went white as parchment. Her trembling hands reached out, then recoiled as if burned. "Get him out," she hissed, her voice barely audible beneath the newborn's cries. "Samuel, now." Mama Ruth stood frozen, her weathered face torn between horror and pity. The 2 house servants backed toward the door, their eyes wide with the knowledge that witnessing this could mean their deaths. Samuel alone remained steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. Mrs. Carter's eyes locked onto his with desperate intensity. "Hide the darkest one immediately," she commanded, her cultured Virginia accent cracking with panic. "No one can see, no one can know. Do you understand me, Samuel?" He understood perfectly. The child's existence proved what could never be proven, what would destroy everything Elizabeth Carter possessed, her marriage, her status, possibly her life. In 1856, Virginia, white women did not bear dark-skinned children unless they had violated the most sacred taboo of Southern society. The father could only be a black man, likely one of the plantation's slaves. Whether by force or consent made no difference to the law or social condemnation that would follow. Samuel took the infant, still wet with birth, and wrapped him in a coarse gray blanket rather than the fine linen given to his brothers. The baby was smaller than the others, his cries weaker, but his eyes, when they briefly opened, were alert and searching. Something in Samuel's chest twisted painfully. "Where will you take him?" Mama Ruth whispered, her voice laden with sorrow. "The old root cellar," Samuel replied quietly. "Behind the smokehouse. No one uses it anymore." Mrs. Carter had turned her face to the wall, shoulders shaking with silent sobs. The 2 healthy babies lay in an ornate cradle beside her bed, oblivious to their missing brother. Samuel wondered if she would ever look at them without remembering the 3rd child she ordered hidden away. He slipped through the dark house, past the library where Master Thomas dozed in his chair, past the kitchen where exhausted servants finally rested. Outside, the June night pressed hot and thick against his skin. Cicadas screamed in the trees. The baby whimpered against his chest. The root cellar was exactly as he remembered, a stone chamber dug into a hillside, cool and dark, filled with abandoned farming equipment and forgotten preserves. Samuel had hidden here as a boy, escaping overseers and seeking moments of solitude. Now it would become a nursery for a child who could not exist. He fashioned a bed from old burlap sacks and a wooden crate. The baby needed milk, warmth, constant care. How could he provide these things while maintaining his regular duties? The impossibility of the situation crashed over him, yet refusing Mrs. Carter was not an option. Disobedience meant the whip, the auction block, or worse. Samuel returned to the main house before dawn, slipping into the kitchen to steal milk from the morning's delivery. He soaked torn cloth strips and let the baby suckle them, a poor substitute for a mother's breast, but enough to quiet his hunger. The infant drank greedily, his small hands curling into fists. "I'll call you Micah," Samuel whispered, surprising himself. Naming the child made him real, transformed him from a problem to be hidden into a person deserving life. It means, who is like God? You'll need God's strength for the path ahead. The first week passed in exhausting secrecy. Samuel rose hours before dawn to feed Micah, stole away during midday breaks, and crept out again after the main house slept. Other slaves noticed his absences, but said nothing, understanding that questions could be deadly. The code of silence among the enslaved protected them all. Mrs. Carter never asked about the child. She received visitors who cooed over her beautiful twin boys, James and William, accepting congratulations and gifts with practiced grace. Master Thomas strutted through the plantation, boasting about his heirs to neighboring landowners. The ghost of their third son haunted nobody but Samuel and the mother who refused to acknowledge him. On the 8th day, Mrs. Carter summoned Samuel to her private sitting room. She had recovered her color and composure, looking every inch the plantation mistress in her silk dress and pearls. But her hands trembled as she poured tea. Is he alive?" she asked without meeting his eyes. "Yes, ma'am." "Healthy?" "Seems so. Small but strong enough." She closed her eyes, relief and anguish warring across her features. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then she retrieved a small leather pouch from her desk drawer and pressed it into his hands. "For supplies. Milk, cloth, whatever is needed." Her voice dropped to barely a whisper. I will never be able to acknowledge him, Samuel. You understand this?" "Yes, ma'am. If my husband discovers—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Both knew the consequences. Thomas Carter was not a cruel master by the standards of the time, but he possessed an iron commitment to propriety and honor. His wife bearing another man's child, especially a black child, would demand swift and terrible retribution. Samuel should have left then, should have maintained the proper distance between master and slave. Instead, he asked the question burning in his mind. "Who was his father, ma'am?" Mrs. Carter's face went rigid. "That is not your concern." "Begging your pardon, but it is. If anyone sees him, if questions get asked—" "They won't. You'll make certain of it." Her tone turned cold, imperious. But then her mask cracked, and she pressed a hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. "Oh God, what have I done? What have I done to that innocent child?" Samuel had seen many things in his years of bondage: brutality, degradation, suffering beyond measure. But he had never seen a white woman, particularly one of Mrs. Carter's status, cry with genuine anguish over the fate of a black child. The moment unsettled him, hinting at depths he didn't wish to explore. "You did what you thought necessary to survive, ma'am," he said quietly. "Same as all of us do." She looked at him then, truly looked as if seeing him as something beyond a servant for the first time. "You're a good man, Samuel, better than most white men I know." The words hung dangerous and forbidden between them. Samuel bowed and retreated before either could say more. As weeks became months, Samuel's life revolved around Micah's care. The boy thrived despite circumstances, growing plump and alert. He smiled at 6 weeks, laughed at 2 months, reached for Samuel's face with chubby fingers. The cellar, initially cold and forbidding, became something almost like a home. Samuel brought candles, blankets, a rocking chair salvaged from the plantation's discard pile. During long evenings, he sat with Micah in his arms, humming old spirituals his own mother had sung before she was sold away. Other slaves began to suspect. Mama Ruth said nothing, but her knowing eyes followed Samuel whenever he passed. Old Jacob, who tended the smokehouse, surely noticed Samuel's frequent visits to the supposedly abandoned cellar. Yet the conspiracy of silence held. Everyone had secrets on the plantation, and protecting each other's was a matter of survival. Mrs. Carter's visits began in September. She came at dusk, when shadows made identification difficult, wrapped in a plain shawl rather than her usual finery. Samuel had been changing Micah's soiled cloth when he heard footsteps outside the cellar door. He froze, certain they were discovered. Elizabeth Carter descended the steps like a ghost, her face pale in the candlelight. For a long moment, she simply stared at the child in Samuel's arms. Micah, now 3 months old, gazed back with curious dark eyes. "He looks like—" She couldn't finish. "He looks like himself, ma'am," Samuel said gently. She approached slowly, as if the child might shatter. When she finally touched Micah's cheek, tears streamed down her face. "My son," she whispered. "My beautiful, impossible son." Something shifted that evening. Mrs. Carter began visiting regularly, always after dark, always in disguise. She brought gifts, a silver rattle, embroidered blankets, a music box that played soft lullabies. She held Micah, fed him, sang to him in ways she never did with James and William, who attended primarily by servants despite their legitimacy. Samuel watched these encounters with growing unease. The risk was immense. If Master Thomas or any visitor stumbled upon them, all 3 would face destruction. Yet he could not deny Mrs. Carter these moments, nor could he ignore the strange intimacy developing in that hidden cellar. One November evening, after Micah had fallen asleep, Mrs. Carter remained sitting in the rocking chair, her usual urgency to leave absent. Samuel busied himself organizing supplies, trying to maintain proper boundaries that felt increasingly artificial. "His father was Marcus," she said suddenly. Samuel's hands stilled. Marcus had been a field hand, sold south 8 months ago after Master Thomas suspected him of teaching other slaves to read. He had been young, educated beyond what was permitted, and tragically handsome. "He didn't force me," Mrs. Carter continued, her voice hollow. "I want you to know that. I approached him, my husband. Thomas treats me like a broodmare, a decoration for his arm. Marcus spoke to me like a person. He read poetry to me from a forbidden book. I knew it was madness, but I couldn't stop." Samuel said nothing. What could he say? The confession was dangerous for both of them. "When I discovered I was pregnant, I prayed it would look like Thomas. When the doctor said twins, I thought God had shown mercy. 2 white babies to obscure any doubt." She laughed bitterly. "Instead, he gave me 3 children and only 2 I can claim." "Why tell me this, ma'am?" "Because you're the only person who knows the truth. The only person who sees Micah as a child rather than a problem." She stood, moving closer to where Samuel stood. Too close. Dangerously close. "You've become essential to me, Samuel. Not just to Micah, but to me." The air between them crackled with unspoken things. Samuel stepped back, his heart racing. "Mrs. Carter, this isn't—" I know what it is, what it can never be." Her hand reached out anyway, fingertips brushing his arm. But in this cellar, in these moments, can we not pretend the world is different? Samuel had spent his life navigating the impossible territory between servitude and survival. He understood the game, how to be useful without being threatening, how to anticipate needs without presuming equality. But this was new terrain, fraught with dangers that extended beyond physical punishment. "The world is what it is, ma'am," he said firmly, though his voice shook. "Pretending don't change nothing." She withdrew her hand, cheeks flushing with shame or anger, or both. "Of course. Forgive my foolishness." She gathered her shawl and left without another word, leaving Samuel alone with the sleeping child and his racing thoughts. The visits stopped for 3 weeks. Samuel felt both relief and unexpected loss. He had grown accustomed to those evenings, to the way Mrs. Carter's presence transformed the cellar into something almost like a real home. Micah noticed too, fussing more, his eyes searching the doorway at dusk. Then, on a freezing December night, she returned. Her face was bruised, a purple shadow along her left cheekbone poorly concealed by powder. "Thomas discovered I purchased books with household money," she said flatly. "He reminded me that I own nothing. Everything belongs to him, including me." Samuel had witnessed such reminders before. Many plantation mistresses bore similar marks, though most hid them better. The code of Southern honor permitted a man to discipline his wife as he saw fit, provided he maintained discretion. Mrs. Carter sank into the rocking chair, and for the first time since her visits began, she truly broke. Not the delicate tears of maternal longing, but deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. Samuel stood helpless, Micah sleeping against his shoulder, watching this woman, powerful and powerless simultaneously, crumble before him. When she finally quieted, she looked up with red-rimmed eyes. "We're not so different, you and I. Both property, both trapped. With respect, ma'am, we're very different. You'll never be sold. You'll never feel the whip. Your children, 2 of them at least, will inherit wealth and position." "True," she wiped her eyes. "But I would trade it all to be free, truly free, to claim all my children, to choose my own path." "Freedom don't mean nothing if you dead," Samuel replied bluntly. "We survive by accepting what can't be changed." "Is that what you've done?" "Accepted." He looked down at Micah. This child he never chose to care for, but now couldn't imagine abandoning. "I've accepted that some things are worth the danger of trying to change." Their eyes met in understanding that transcended the artificial boundaries of race and status. In that moment, they were simply 2 people trapped in an unjust system, doing their best to protect an innocent life. The visits resumed their rhythm, but something had shifted. Mrs. Carter and Samuel talked more, shared stories from their vastly different childhoods, debated philosophy and morality during hours that should have been sleeping. The dangerous attraction that had sparked before evolved into something more complex. Not quite friendship, not quite romance, but a profound connection born of shared secrets and mutual respect. Micah grew into a bright, curious toddler. By his first birthday, he was walking, babbling, reaching for both his hidden mother and his reluctant guardian with equal affection. Samuel taught him words, showed him pictures from a contraband children's book Mrs. Carter had provided. The boy learned quickly, his intelligence evident even at such a young age. "He could be anything," Mrs. Carter said wistfully one evening, watching Micah stack wooden blocks. "In a different world, he could be a scholar, a leader. In this world, he'll be lucky to survive," Samuel replied, the harsh truth necessary, even if painful. "Perhaps the world will change. Perhaps. But not in time for him." Mrs. Carter turned to Samuel, her expression intense. "If I could free you both, if I could find a way north—" "Don't speak that dream aloud, ma'am. Dreams like that get people killed." Yet the dream persisted. growing between them like a forbidden plant seeking sunlight. They began planning in whispers. Routes through the Underground Railroad, contacts who might help, money that could be stolen from the plantation's accounts. It was madness, treason, impossibility, but it gave them hope. The first disaster struck in March 1857. Old Jacob, the smokehouse tender, died suddenly of heart failure. Master Thomas decided to convert the old storage area into a new workshop, which meant clearing the cellar Samuel and Micah had called home for 9 months. "You have 3 days," Mrs. Carter told Samuel urgently. "Find somewhere else, somewhere safer." But where? The plantation offered few truly hidden spaces, and Micah was too old now to keep perfectly quiet. Samuel moved them to the hayloft above the horse stables, a temporary solution that left him constantly anxious. Micah hated the change, crying more, sleeping less. Mrs. Carter's visits became riskier but more frequent. She seemed desperate to maintain contact, as if losing their hiding place had awakened her to how fragile their situation truly was. One night, Samuel found her weeping in the hayloft, Micah asleep in her arms. "I can't do this anymore," she whispered. "I can't pretend he doesn't exist. I can't go weeks without holding him." "You have to, ma'am, for his sake and yours." "Then run. Take him north. I'll give you money, contacts, whatever you need." Samuel had thought about this countless times, weighing the terrible mathematics of escape. He was in his mid-30s, strong but not young. Micah was a toddler who couldn't run or stay quiet for hours. The journey north meant weeks of travel through hostile territory, with slave catchers and dogs hunting anyone who fit their description. The odds of success were slim. "And if we're caught?" he asked quietly. Mrs. Carter's silence answered him. Captured runaways faced torture, maiming, or death as warnings to others. Micah would likely be sold deep south, into conditions that made Carter Plantation look merciful by comparison. "I can't leave," Samuel finally said. "Not yet. He's too young. We wouldn't make it." "Then when?" "When he's old enough to run and hide on his own, maybe 5 or 6 years old. When he can understand the need for silence." Mrs. Carter nodded, though both knew 5 years might as well be forever. So much could go wrong in that time. The second disaster arrived 2 months later, in the form of Thomas Carter's brother, Edmund, visiting from South Carolina. Edmund was everything Thomas was not: loud, crude, openly brutal to the slaves he encountered. He prowled the plantation like a wolf, commenting on livestock and laborers with equal disdain. One evening, Edmund insisted on a tour of the entire property, including buildings rarely visited. Master Thomas, irritated but obliging, agreed. Samuel got word from another house servant and rushed to the stables, climbing the ladder to where Micah played with wooden horses. "We have to hide," he whispered urgently. "Right now, not a sound." He stuffed Micah into a large grain sack, the boy thankfully understanding enough to stay quiet, and buried the sack under loose hay. Then Samuel descended and began mucking stalls, trying to look occupied and ordinary. The brothers arrived 10 minutes later. Edmund poked around, made lewd comments about a mare in heat, then started climbing toward the hayloft. "Nothing up there but hay and rats," Thomas said dismissively. "Still want to see." Edmund's boots thudded on the ladder rungs. Samuel's heart stopped. If Micah made any sound, if he shifted wrong and revealed the sack's unusual shape, everything would end. He gripped his pitchfork and prayed to a god he wasn't sure existed anymore. Edmund spent an eternity, actually about 3 minutes, poking through the hay, kicking at loose boards, complaining about the dust. Micah remained silent, perfectly, impossibly silent. Finally, Edmund descended, bored with his inspection. "See? Just hay and rats, like I said." Thomas clapped his brother's shoulder. "Let's get back to the house. I've got bourbon older than most of your slaves." They left laughing, oblivious to how close they'd come to discovering everything. Samuel waited until their voices faded completely before extracting Micah from the grain sack. The boy was red-faced from heat and fear, but hadn't made a sound. "Good boy," Samuel whispered, hugging him close. Such a good, brave boy. That night, Mrs. Carter came to the stable in a state of near hysteria. She had heard about Edmund's tour and imagined the worst. "We can't keep doing this," she gasped, pressing her hands to her temples. "Every day, every moment, we risk everything. What choice do we have?" She looked at him with wild eyes. "Run with me. Take Micah and run, and I'll come with you. We'll go north together." Samuel stared at her, shocked. "Ma'am, you're talking madness. A white woman traveling with a black man and a mixed-race child? We'd be caught within a day, and they'd destroy you worse than us. I don't care anymore. I can't keep living this lie. You can and you will, because giving up means Micah loses everything, his mother, his protector, his chance at any kind of future." Samuel gripped her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. "I know you're suffering. I know this is tearing you apart, but falling apart now helps nobody." She crumpled against him, and for a long moment they simply held each other, two people bound by circumstance and a love for a child they could never publicly claim. The embrace should have been brief, proper, but it extended, deepened. Samuel felt her breath against his neck, her fingers clutching his shirt. When she tilted her face upward, when her lips met his, he didn't pull away immediately. The kiss was desperate, forbidden, weighted with all the loneliness and longing they'd both suppressed for months. It lasted perhaps 10 seconds before Samuel's survival instincts overrode everything else, and he broke contact. "No," he said firmly, though his voice shook. "We can't. This is exactly how people end up dead." Mrs. Carter touched her lips, looking dazed. "I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. Neither of us should have. But we did. Now we have to pretend it never happened." She nodded, gathering her composure with visible effort. "You're right. Of course you're right." She looked toward where Micah slept in his nest of blankets. "I should go." "Yes, ma'am." She left without another word, but the moment hung between them like smoke, impossible to fully disperse. The months that followed were excruciating. Mrs. Carter's visits became less frequent, both of them trying to maintain distance after their mistake. But the bond remained, pulling them back together despite reason. When they were together, they were careful, proper, focused entirely on Micah. Yet the air crackled with unspoken things, with the memory of that single forbidden kiss. Micah, now approaching 2 years old, sensed the tension without understanding it. He grew fussy when his mother visited, as if recognizing that her presence brought both joy and complicated pain. Samuel watched the boy develop his own coping mechanisms, learning when to be silent, when to hide, when to pretend he didn't exist. It was a terrible education for such a young child, but necessary for survival. The final disaster came in August 1857 during a late-night thunderstorm. Samuel had put Micah to bed and was dozing when footsteps pounded up the hayloft ladder. He jolted awake, reaching for Micah to hide him, but it was too late. Thomas Carter stood at the top of the ladder, lantern held high, his face carved from stone. "Show yourself," he commanded. "Now." Samuel's mind raced through impossible calculations. Running was futile. Fighting would mean instant death. Lying seemed equally pointless with Micah visible behind him, staring at the stranger with wide, fearful eyes. "I asked you a question, Samuel. Whose child is this?" The truth would destroy them all. A lie might buy time. Samuel chose the only option available. "Mine, sir, my son." Thomas descended another rung, bringing the lantern closer to Micah's face. The boy's features were unmistakable. Not quite white, not quite black, but something in between that told a very specific story. "Yours," Thomas repeated flatly. And the mother? Gone, sir. Sold before he was born. I've been caring for him in secret because I couldn't bear to lose another child. It was partially true. Samuel had been sold away from his own children years ago, a pain that never fully healed. But the lie was obvious to anyone who looked closely at Micah's features, at the quality of his clothes, at the expensive toys scattered around the hayloft. Thomas studied the boy for a long, terrible minute. Then he looked at Samuel with an expression that mixed disgust, understanding, and something that might have been pity. You expect me to believe this child is yours? With that skin? Those features? I know how it looks, sir, but enough. Thomas held up a hand. I'm not a fool, Samuel. I've seen this boy before, haven't I? Caught glimpses, heard whispers among the slaves. I chose not to investigate because... He trailed off, jaw working. Samuel remained silent, understanding that anything he said could only make things worse. Is my wife involved in this? The question came out quiet, dangerous. No, sir. She knows nothing about him. Another lie. Thomas descended the final rungs, standing now just feet from where Micah huddled behind Samuel. My wife has been different these past months. Distracted, making excuses to visit this part of the plantation. I assumed she was having an affair with one of the overseers. He laughed bitterly. The truth is somehow worse, isn't it? Samuel said nothing. Micah began to cry softly. Thomas stared at the child, and Samuel saw the exact moment when the master recognized the truth. Saw his wife's eyes in that small face, understood the magnitude of what had been hidden from him. His face went white, then red, veins standing out on his neck. Whose child is this, Samuel? His voice had dropped to a whisper more terrifying than any shout. Tell me the truth, or I will have you whipped until you do. The choice was impossible. Protect Mrs. Carter and doom himself, or tell the truth and destroy them all. Samuel opened his mouth, unsure what words would emerge, when a voice cut through the darkness. He's mine. Mrs. Carter stood at the base of the ladder, still in her nightgown, her hair loose around her shoulders. She climbed upward with steady purpose, and Samuel saw she had made her choice, had likely been watching and waiting for this moment, ready to sacrifice everything. Elizabeth. Thomas's voice broke on her name. His name is Micah. He's my son, my third child, born the same night as James and William. She reached the hayloft and moved to stand beside Samuel, facing her husband. I ordered Samuel to hide him, to care for him in secret. He has been protecting me all this time, not betraying you. The silence stretched impossibly long. Rain pounded on the stable roof. Micah's crying had stopped, the boys sensing the gravity of the moment. Who is the father? Thomas finally asked. Marcus, the field hand you sold last year. Something in Thomas's face shattered. He had suspected many things, clearly, but hearing the confirmation destroyed the last of his composure. A slave. You lay with a slave and bore his bastard child. Yes, and hid him, and involved my own property in your deception. Samuel had no choice. I commanded him. The fault is entirely mine. Thomas looked between his wife, Samuel, and the child who represented the complete destruction of his honor and status. If this became known, he would be ruined. A cuckold unable to control his own wife, tainted by association with miscegenation. What am I supposed to do with this? He asked, and for the first time Samuel heard genuine confusion in the master's voice. How am I supposed to fix this? You can't, Elizabeth said simply. No one can. But it can remain hidden. No one knows except Samuel, myself, and now you. We can continue as before. Continue. Thomas's laugh was ugly. You think I can simply pretend this never happened? That I can look at my legitimate sons without remembering their brother? He spat the last word like poison. You've pretended not to notice many things over the years. Elizabeth replied, and Samuel heard steel in her voice. "Your own indiscretions with the slave women, the children working in our fields who have your eyes, your nose. Don't pretend this plantation has ever been morally pure." The accusation hung in the air. Samuel knew it was true, knew which children bore the master's features, which slave women had been forced to endure his attentions. But such things were never spoken aloud, especially not by a wife to her husband. Thomas's hand moved to his belt, and Samuel tensed, ready to throw himself between the man and his wife. But Thomas merely stood there, trembling with rage or shame or both. "Get out," he finally said to Elizabeth. "Return to the house. We'll discuss your punishment in the morning. And Micah? The child stays here. I need time to decide what to do with him." Elizabeth looked at Samuel, her eyes pleading. He gave the smallest nod, trying to communicate trust and reassurance he didn't fully feel. She descended the ladder slowly, each step measured, and disappeared into the rainy night. Thomas remained, staring at Micah with an expression Samuel couldn't read. The boy had gone completely still, some instinct warning him to become invisible. "How old is he?" Thomas asked. 14 months, sir." "Can he speak?" "A few words." Thomas crouched down, bringing himself level with the child. Micah stared back, unblinking. For a long moment, master and forbidden child studied each other. "He has her eyes," Thomas said quietly. Elizabeth's eyes, in that face. He stood abruptly. "Keep him here. Keep him hidden, as you've been doing. Tell no one about tonight, not the other slaves, not my wife, no one. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir. If anyone discovers this, if any word spreads, I will hold you personally responsible. You'll be sold south to the worst plantation I can find, and the child—" He didn't finish the threat. "I understand, sir." Thomas left without another word, descending into the storm. Samuel waited until the footsteps faded before pulling Micah into his arms, holding the boy while his own body shook with delayed terror. The next weeks passed in agonizing uncertainty. Mrs. Carter never visited the stable again. Samuel caught glimpses of her in the main house, moving like a ghost through her daily routines. She had new bruises, poorly concealed, and walked with the careful stiffness of someone in constant pain. Thomas's punishment had been severe. Samuel continued caring for Micah in the hayloft, but the joy had drained from their hidden life. The boy sensed the change, growing quieter, more withdrawn. He stopped laughing, stopped playing with his toys. At not quite 2 years old, Micah was learning the same hard lesson all enslaved children eventually learned: that the world was fundamentally unsafe, and survival meant making yourself small. Then, one September morning, Mama Ruth came to Samuel with a message. Mrs. Carter wanted to see him in the garden pavilion at dusk. Samuel arrived to find her looking thinner, older, her eyes hollow with exhaustion. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Thomas is selling Micah," she said bluntly. "He's made arrangements with a trader from New Orleans. They come next week." The words hit like a physical blow. New Orleans meant the Deep South, meant conditions that killed children within years. Micah would disappear into that brutal system and never be heard from again. "There has to be another way," Samuel said desperately. "There is." Elizabeth pulled a leather pouch from her dress, heavy with coins. "Run, tonight. I've arranged contacts along the Underground Railroad. They'll help you get north to Pennsylvania. From there, you can reach Canada." "Mrs. Carter, don't argue. Don't tell me it's too dangerous or that you can't leave. You have to try, Samuel. For Micah, he has a chance at life if you run. None if you stay." Samuel took the pouch, feeling the weight of it. More money than he'd seen in his entire life. Enough to bribe guides and buy supplies for the journey. Enough to maybe, possibly, buy freedom. "What about you?" he asked. She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. I'll survive. I've survived everything else. But I need to know Micah is safe, that he'll grow up free. Somewhere my husband can't reach him. You're giving up your son. I'm giving him a chance. Tears stream down her face now. I can't keep him, Samuel. I can never acknowledge him, never hold him publicly, never give him the life he deserves. But you can. You can raise him, teach him, love him as a father rather than a secret keeper. Samuel understood what she was truly saying, that he had become more than a protector, had become Micah's real parent in all the ways that mattered. The boy called him Papa in his limited vocabulary, reached for him when frightened, trusted him completely. When you reach freedom, Elizabeth continued, tell him about me. Tell him his mother loved him enough to let him go. Promise me, Samuel. I promise. She stepped closer, and for the second time they embraced. This time there was no passion, only shared grief and desperate love for a child neither could fully claim. She pressed something into his hand, a small silver locket containing her portrait. So he knows my face, she whispered. They separated, and Samuel knew he would never see her again. That night, under a waning moon, Samuel wrapped Micah in a warm cloak and slipped away from Carter Plantation. He moved through familiar woods toward the first safe house, the boy asleep against his chest, the leather pouch heavy in his pocket. Behind them, Elizabeth Carter stood at her bedroom window, watching two shadows disappear into darkness. Her hand pressed against the glass, and she whispered a prayer, not to God, but to the universe itself, that somewhere in this cruel world, there was room for her son to be free. Thomas found her there an hour later. They're gone, he said flatly. Yes. You helped them. Yes. He could have her arrested, could send hunters after them, could destroy what remained of her life. Instead, he simply nodded, some part of him perhaps relieved to have the problem removed. We never speak of this again, he said, to anyone. Ever. Agreed. The secret settled between them like ash, covering everything, acknowledged by both but spoken by neither. In the years to come, they would maintain the facade of their marriage, raise their legitimate sons, and never mention the third child born on that June night. But Elizabeth kept the matching locket Samuel had left behind, occasionally opening it to see the face of the son she had loved enough to lose. She wondered where he was, whether he remembered her voice, whether Samuel had kept his promise to tell Micah the truth. She never knew that Samuel and Micah reached Pennsylvania after 6 harrowing weeks. Never knew that Micah grew up free, educated, strong. Never knew that Samuel told him stories every night about the brave mother who had sacrificed everything for his freedom. Some secrets remain buried. Others transform into legends passed down through generations, the truth and the myth becoming inseparable over time. The truth was this. In 1856, Virginia, on a plantation defined by bondage and brutality, 3 people had tried to protect an innocent child from a system designed to crush him. They had failed in some ways, succeeded in others, and in doing so, had proven that even in the darkest circumstances, love could survive. Complicated, forbidden, painful love, but love nonetheless. Years later, when news of the Civil War reached Pennsylvania, Samuel would hold a now-grown Micah and wonder whether Elizabeth had survived, whether she knew her impossible son had lived to see the world change. He would wonder whether Thomas had kept the secret, or whether the truth had eventually destroyed them all. He never knew the answer. And perhaps that was its own kind of mercy, not knowing how the story ended for those left behind, being able to imagine that somewhere, somehow, Elizabeth Carter had found her own measure of peace. The darkness of 1856 eventually gave way to dawn, but not for everyone, and not in the ways anyone had hoped.